It is Mikey from Basement Brewed Fantasy Football coming at you. Super excited. Can't thank you enough for being here for episode 1 of BBFF's Inside the 20. If you watched the prologue episode or listened to the prologue episode via podcast, then you at least have some idea of what these episodes are going to be about. Quite frankly, I don't really even fully know what to expect considering this is episode 1.
I have absolutely no idea what's going on.
And if you did miss the prologue, no worries. These episodes, these Tuesday morning episodes of Inside the 20, are dedicated to me bringing you my 30-plus hours of weekly research and and insights and study and everything that I look at from a fantasy football standpoint so that you can take it and beat the crap out of your friends on the fantasy football field with it in 2024. Friday morning, we're releasing episode 1 of BBFF's In the Trenches, which is going to be a longer form show, 45 to 60 minutes. And in episode 1, I'm going to sit down with former Green Bay Packers offensive lineman Lane Taylor, who spent several years blocking for future Hall of Famer Aaron Rodgers. And we are going to talk everything.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Football, fantasy football, barbecue, beer, his favorite Disney princess. We're going to talk about everything under the sun. And right now, I'm taking submissions from you. Anybody watching, anybody listening that has a question or something that they want to know from Lane Taylor, I'm going to go through submissions, possibly bring him on the show. And if you tune in Friday, we'll see if your submission for what to ask Lane Taylor made the show. And I got to tell you, there's already some good ones, and I really can't wait to hear what his answer is.
Can't wait!
Today, on today's episode of In the 20, we're going to talk about new faces in new places. And let me tell you, there's a lot of them. Okay, if you've ever seen any of my research as it pertains to fantasy football, it's thorough. It is detailed. It's kind of insane. So I quickly realized there's no chance in heck I'm going to cover every single head coaching and offensive coordinator change inside the 20 minutes. So today we're going to cover 2 big ones that I think are important from a fantasy football standpoint. But this is a good time to point out to you that over the next several months, I will be studying and researching every single player, every single coach on every single team that's important for fantasy football. And my promise to you is to bring it to you in a way that can help you beat the crap out of your friends on the fantasy football field, win NFL bets, win DFS contests.
Whoa. Here I come. Here I come.
Today, the first one we're going to talk about here is the Washington Commanders hiring Dan Quinn and Kliff Kingsbury. Now, Dan Quinn, 53 years old. He spent the last several years as the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. He does have some head coaching experience. He spent about 5.5 years coaching the Atlanta Falcons several years back. He had a 43-42 record, basically hovering right around that 500 mark. He made the playoffs in 2 of those 5+ years, and to give him credit, his Falcons were the NFC champions in 2016. Unfortunately, that Super Bowl is very infamously remembered as the time that the Atlanta Falcons blew a 28-3 halftime lead, but got to give credit where it's due. Getting to the Super Bowl is not an easy thing to do. But from a fantasy football standpoint, we're going to look, Dan Quinn's hiring in Washington isn't especially noteworthy because he's a defensive-minded coach. So we got to look at that next level, which is his offensive coordinator, which is Kliff Kingsbury. And this one's interesting. And one of the reasons I picked this out of the dozen or so coaching changes is because of a little back and forth I had on LinkedIn today about somebody mentioned something about, kind of making fun of the Kliff Kingsbury hiring, saying, hey, has anybody checked this guy's resume? Like, he hasn't been a very effective coach in the NFL, which is fair because he did spend 4 seasons with the Arizona Cardinals between 2019 and 2022, and it wasn't pretty. He went 28-37-1. It wasn't a successful tenure as a head coach in the NFL, and by all intents and purposes, it was a bit of a disappointment from what people were expecting when the Cardinals hired him as a head coach. That said, from a fantasy football standpoint, Kingsbury's offenses have at least been on the friendly side of mediocre. They've been slightly above average at absolute worst for the most part. His offenses with the Cardinals finished 21st, 6th, 8th, and 22nd in yards, and they finished 16th, 13th, 11th, and 21st in scoring. Now, he was pretty balanced as far as play call goes. His teams were 19th, 6th, 7th, and 20th in rushing attempts. So, and then they finished 18th, 15th, 18th, and 14th in passing attempts. So a pretty balanced offensive unit as far as fantasy football usage goes. He's not especially run heavy. He's not especially pass heavy. He's pretty balanced. Interestingly, however, from a fantasy football standpoint and down to the micro level, the individual level, Kingsbury did have somewhat of a one running backfield approach, which is useful in fantasy football. You really don't see that too much anymore. Most backfields, like Washington, tend to deploy a 2 running back type of committee. But that wasn't necessarily the case for Kingsbury in Arizona. In 2019, Kenyon Drake averaged 18.9 touches per game. In 2020, Drake averaged 17.6 touches per game. 17 plus touches per game is quite valuable in fantasy football. Now, in 2021, there was a changing of the guard. It changed over to James Conner, and it was a little bit of a two-headed backfield. James Conner averaged 15.9 touches per game, and Chase Edmonds averaged 13.3 touches per game. But then, in 2022, it returned to a one-headed did you guys hear that voice crack? Hitting puberty over here.
Joe, like I did when I went through puberty. Hey, you guys feel like playing some baseball?
Turned back into a one-headed backfield where James Conner averaged 17.6 touches per game in 2022. So, to recap, in 3 of the 4 seasons that Kliff Kingsbury was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, his running back averaged a minimum of 17.6 touches per game, which, by the way, includes about 4 targets per game for the running back in all 4 of those seasons. And if you don't know by now, targets and work in the passing game is the biggest key, besides goal line opportunities, to unlocking a running back's fantasy football potential, value, and upside. Okay? So if you're the RB1 in Washington, that is going to have some value if Kingsbury's tenure in Arizona is anything worth relying on or tells us anything about what to expect in 2024. Being the RB1 in Washington could be of value in 2024. Now, the question is, who is that going to be? Right now, it seems pretty clear, right? Antonio Gibson is an undrafted free agent. He's not under contract with Washington. It remains to be seen, and it's anybody's guess if he's back in Washington or if he's sporting some new threads in 2024. And that would leave Brian Robinson alone at the top of the offensive depth chart for Washington. But Robinson. He was a draft pick. He's a holdover from the Ron Rivera age. We have no idea yet, at least, if Kliff Kingsbury, if Dan Quinn, if they see Brian Robinson as the guy moving forward. But again, this is where you want to stay tuned into Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. This is where you want to stay tuned into the 32 team previews that I'll be releasing over the summer, because whoever ends up as the clear-cut RB1 in Washington is going to carry some pretty significant fantasy viability, especially if they have any chops in the passing game. Now, wide receivers, on the other hand, this is where it actually gets a little bit ugly. Kingsbury's wide receivers in Arizona disappointed, and they disappointed in a pretty big way considering he had Kyler Murray at quarterback, but then he also had DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver. He worked with Larry Fitzgerald, Marquise Brown, Christian Kirk. In 2020, DeAndre Hopkins was the wide receiver 4. He had a fantastic season, a terrific season. 160 targets, 115 catches, 1,407 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He averaged 18 PPR points per game to finish as fantasy's wide receiver 4. Terrific. Great year. That is the only year, and that's the only instance in 4 seasons that Kliff Kingsbury was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, that any Cardinal, including Hopkins, eclipsed 1,000 receiving yards. None of the other wide receivers, including Hopkins, had over 1,000 receiving yards in any of the 4 seasons. with Kingsbury. Now, that is concerning considering, A, the Washington Commanders don't have Kyler Murray. They currently have Sam Howell, who, by the way, I'm a big fan of Sam Howell. That's not a knock on him or to hate on him. I think it's fair to say that the majority of humans on planet Earth would select Kyler Murray over Sam Howell as their quarterback. And again, who knows who's starting under center for Washington come September. They have a high draft pick. In all likelihood, they're going to draft a quarterback. Maybe they bring somebody in from free agency. But as of right now, it's Sam Howell. It's not Kyler Murray. And they have Terry McLaurin as the wide receiver 1, but they did use a first-round draft pick on Jahan Dotson 2 years ago. Curtis Samuel is an unrestricted free agent. It remains to be seen if he'll be back with the team. But it seems highly unlikely, at least in year 1 of the Dan Quinn, Kliff Kingsbury era, that Washington is able to support more than one fantasy viable wide receiver, considering Kingsbury's wide receivers barely supported one fantasy viable wide receiver in the 4 years he was there, despite working with Nuke, Fitzgerald, Marquise Brown, and Christian Kirk, who's been great in Jacksonville ever since Arizona. Okay? So all in all, great. There's seemingly an automatic great setup for whoever ends up as the RB1 in Washington, but there should be some considerable skepticism regarding the Washington passing game heading into 2024, especially with defensive-minded Dan Quinn at head coach, who's likely going to want to run the ball and keep his defense on the field as much as possible, theoretically, because Washington's defense was among the bottom 3 units, so they might be forced to pass the ball if they don't show signs of improvement in 2024. But stay tuned, because we're going to get much clearer answers as the season goes on. Before we move on to the next head coaching change, first, a quick word from our sponsors. Sustain Health and Performance and their owner, Jordan Poggle, they're the go-to resource for any busy BBFF subscriber that's looking to lose weight and keep it off for good. In fact, one BBFF subscriber lost over 30 pounds in his first 4 months of working with Jordan. And I myself, by the way, I worked with Jordan for several months, lowering my blood pressure, lowering my cholesterol, and even accidentally losing 11 pounds, which was never the intent of me working with him to begin with. It was just kind of a nice added side bonus. So if you are looking for a simple, sustainable, and effective way to lose weight and keep it off for good, all while feeling and performing your very best every single day, then do yourself a favor and connect with Jordan on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you hang out the most, or just go ahead and follow the link that's in the show notes, and that way you can learn more about how he can help you too. And if you do contact Jordan, be sure to tell him that I, Mikey Henninger, sent you, because any BBFF subscriber will get 10% off their first 4 months of coaching and working with Jordan. The next coaching change I want to discuss is the reunion of Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, who, if you're a fan of the LA Chargers, if that's the football team that you support, you have every right to be really excited about that hire. That's a high pedigree of coaching that you just brought in to lead your football team. If you didn't know, those two, Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, have already worked together in the NFL for 4 years for the San Francisco 49ers between the years of 2011 and 2014, where Harbaugh was the coach and Greg Roman was the offensive coordinator. And together, the two of them went 44-19-1 with 3 playoff appearances in 4 years, and a Super Bowl, unfortunate loss, but a Super Bowl appearance in 2012 where they lost to the Baltimore Ravens. So if you're a Chargers fan, bravo. That is awesome. That's exciting for you. If you're a fantasy football player, this is terrifying news. It's terrifying news that Greg Roman is once again going to be the offensive coordinator for the 49ers. In 4 years that the two of them worked together, their offenses finished 26th, 11th, 24th, and 20th in yards. And they were better in the scoring department, finishing 11th, 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 and 25th. Where it gets a little bit scary is when we look at the splits between rushing and passing. In those 4 years, the 49ers offenses finished 3rd, 7th, 3rd, and 9th in rushing attempts, but they finished 31st, 31st, 32nd and 29th in pass attempts. So they were fourth. They were the fourth worst or worse team in passing attempts in all 4 seasons that Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman worked together with the San Francisco 49ers. During those seasons, Alex Smith was the QB 14, Colin Kaepernick was the QB 9, and Colin Kaepernick was the QB 16, and there was one year where they basically split time 8 games and 8 games, making it kind of irrelevant to look at where they landed in fantasy football. Now, during that time, the one reliable piece from a fantasy football standpoint every single year was Frank Mother effing Gore. This guy averaged at least 16.6 touches per game in all 4 seasons with the 49ers, which includes his age 30 and age 31 year, where he was still getting these high volume seasons. And by the way, he was the only, he was very much a one-headed monster in that backfield. He was a one-headed running back. It wasn't a running back by committee. The next closest was Kendall Hunter in 2011, who averaged 8 touches per game. He was the next closest running back in any of those 4 years. Okay, so if those 4 years are any indication of what to expect from the LA Chargers moving forward, then we should expect them to have a one running back backfield for the most part. Now, who that's going to be is currently the big question, because Austin Eckler would make a lot of sense, but he's currently an unrestricted free agent and can go anywhere he wants. Now, it's been reported that the Chargers do want to bring him back, and if that happens, it's all systems go on a big bounce back year for Austin Eckler, and he will likely be very high on my draft boards because he's coming off a down year where his average draft position is likely to be suppressed, and he's probably going to be cheap at a value if he ends up back in LA with the Chargers. If he doesn't, then technically speaking, the next men up are Isaiah Spiller and Elijah Dotson. However, the Chargers would likely go get somebody from free agency or in the draft. But keep your ears open, keep your eyes open, see who's going to be the RB1 for the Chargers in 2024, because there will be some very real fantasy value there. By the way, Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator, he has spent 10 years in the NFL as an offensive coordinator, and his offenses have finished in the top 9 in rushing attempts in all 10 years. The entire decade that he has been an offensive coordinator, his offenses have been in the top 9 every single year of rushing attempts. Conversely, on the other hand, his offenses have finished 28th or worse. Okay, so there's 32 teams in the NFL. He's been the 5th worst or lower. He's been 28th or worse in passing attempts in 9 of 10 seasons. Giant red flag for the LA Chargers passing game. Giant red flag for Justin Herbert. Giant red flag for Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, all of which, by the way, are under contract for the 2024 season. Now, 3 of those 4, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, 3 of those 4 are going to be unrestricted free agents next year. So it's likely that they won't all be on the roster for kickoff of opening weekend. But in the 4 years that Harbaugh and Roman worked together with the 49ers, the best wide receiver finish was wide receiver 15, which Michael Crabtree did in 2012 and Anquan Boldin did in 2013, which, to be fair, they finished wide receiver 27, 15, 15, and 18 in the 4 years. So the wide receiver 1 was at least productive, but there was no such thing as a wide receiver 2 for the 49ers. Point being, the likelihood of the Chargers supporting more than one fantasy viable wide receiver are highly unlikely if Greg Roman's decade as an offensive coordinator tells us anything about what to expect in 2024. One quick note on this, Vernon Davis, by the way, in 4 years with the 49ers, he did finish as Fantasy's tight end number 9 in 2011 and Fantasy's tight end number 5 in 2013. So depending on who's playing tight end for the Chargers, there could be some fantasy viability there. Then again, the 49ers really didn't have a second wide receiver, so Vernon Davis was kind of forced to be that wide receiver too, where we've already discussed that the Chargers have plenty of mouths to feed at the wide receiver position. There's literally about a dozen more head coaching and offensive coordinator changes that we could discuss and what it looks like from a fantasy football standpoint in 2024, but I promised you a less than 20-minute episode, and I'm already a liar.
Focus. The color of this pen is...
One episode into it, because this thing's about to go over 20 minutes. I know it, you know it, but I promise I'm about to wrap it up, and hopefully you'll show me some grace for episode 1. But keep it locked onto Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Keep it locked onto this channel. Keep it locked onto basementbrewedff.com, because I promise you, I'm going to spend the next several months spending 30 hours per week researching every single fantasy-relevant player on every single NFL team and bring everything I find to you. Any competitive advantage that I can possibly find, I'm going to bring that to you so that you can turn around and dominate your friends on the fantasy football and be the ultimate high achiever in your fantasy football leagues. Speaking of which, Paul Conley has created a group of men called the High Achievers. It's a men's mastermind group where it's helping men become the best husbands, the best fathers, the best professionals that they can possibly be, all while achieving huge goals, genuine friendships, and connecting with other like-minded, high-growth, high-focused oriented guys. Now, we do this through group coaching. We do this through monthly expert speakers he brings on, goal-setting sessions, and a heck of a lot more that I can't even think of right now. And guys, this group meets every single week, and yours truly is a part of it. And I got to tell you, it's not just a game changer. It is a life elevator, taking you from where you are now to the man that you want to be moving forward. Get in touch with Paul Conley and the High Achievers using the information provided inside the show notes. That's all I got for you today on this first episode of BBFF's Inside the 20, which, candidly, is more like Inside the 25. I guess we had a false start penalty. We're back to the 25, and we're going from there. Hopefully you show me some grace on this first episode. But tune in on Friday morning. I am so excited about Friday morning, the first episode of BBFF's In the Trenches. I'm going to sit down with Lane Taylor, who is a former offensive lineman for the Green Bay Packers and Houston Texans. He spent the majority of his career blocking for future Hall of Famer Aaron Rodgers. We're going to sit down and talk about everything under the sun. Football, fantasy football. He's a huge barbecue guy, which is how we originally started talking on Instagram. My daughter wants to ask him his favorite Disney princess. My son wants to ask him his favorite Pokemon. We're talking about everything. And by the way, I'm taking submissions from you. If you have questions for Lane Taylor or there's anything that you want to know about, get them to me. Drop them in the comments. Hit me up on Twitter at BBFFMikey. Find me on LinkedIn, which is where I do most of my online hanging out. Literally, if you just start typing in Mikey Henninger in the search bar, I should pop up. I got a football and a trophy in my name. And it's Mikey, by the way. M-I-K-E-Y. There's no C. That's Mickey. Okay? That's Mickey. But yeah, get in touch with me. Get me your questions. I'm going to be going through the list and choosing what to ask him, and we'll see. Maybe your question gets on the show on Friday morning. But definitely be sure to tune in Friday morning, Episode 1, BBFF's In the Trenches. Until then, connect with me on Twitter, at BBFFMikey. Let's connect on LinkedIn if you hang out on LinkedIn. And if you want to give Basement Brewed Fantasy Football a try in 2024 and you want to dominate your friends on the fantasy football field, you want to win your leagues, you want to win DFS contests, you want to win NFL bets, I have a promo code for the first 5 people. I love doing this Willy Wonka type deal. I have a promo code for the first 5 people that use this promo code, and they're going to get 15% off their subscription. Go to basementbrewedff.com, choose any subscription you want, and enter promo code Inside the 20. All one word, all caps with the number 20, Inside the 20. The first 5 people that use that promo code are getting 15% off their first year subscription. That's all I got for you today. Again, tune in on Friday morning. We'll talk to you then. We'll see you on the fantasy football field. Cheers. This brew's for you.